When people start looking to get into barefoot shoes, one of the bigger concerns is how much money am I going to spend to get started with this? And so for me, finding the perfect value stack between cost and an actually really good shoe is super important. So this video is going to compare two of my favorite budget options when it comes to getting started in the barefoot space. I'm going to let you know what I like about each of them so that you can make a really good decision for yourself and save a little bit of money along the way. Hey, I'm Caden. I'm a doctor of physical therapy and I love barefoot shoes. I've actually reviewed quite a few brands. So if you want to check out some of those to get some more information, just go ahead and click on this playlist up here. It'll take you to all the reviews that I've done so far and key you in on some of the things that I think are really valuable that maybe is going to inform your decision moving forward. All right, let's dive right in. The two shoes that I'm actually going to be comparing today happen to be the first pair of barefoot shoes that I ever owned and the more recent. The first being the Xero Prio and the more recent being the Lono Flow. I'm simply going to walk you through each of the features of these shoes and where I've seen these be valuable for me as I've worn them in the past so that you can kind of get a good idea of if one is going to be better suited for you than the other based on what you need. Because depending on what you're looking for, one might actually be better than the other, but ultimately, they're both going to fit the budget category pretty closely. Let's start with the Prio. I happen to be holding a pair of the Prio suede, but the traditional Prio was actually the first pair of shoes that I ever got from a barefoot perspective. And these currently run $89.99 on Xero's website. So in a budget world, staying under $100 for a pair of shoes, that's a really good sweet spot. And it's typically where I send a lot of people if they're considering starting in the barefoot world, but wanting to stay on a tighter budget. So from a price perspective, we're already in the green as far as that's concerned. Now, as far as function for a barefoot shoe, both the Prio and the Lono fit all of the categories. And so I'm just gonna go ahead and explain those. A barefoot shoe for me needs to be flat, needs to be wide, and it needs to be flexible. Okay, flat meaning that it's got a zero drop from the back to the front. It needs to be wide, meaning it needs to have a foot-shaped toe box so that your feet can actually spread and splay and function the way that they were designed to. And it needs to be flexible. You need to be able to move the shoe so that it can move with your foot, which actually has a ton of bones and a lot of different structures that allow it to adapt to the ground. We need all of those things to be present for this to be a usable barefoot shoe, in my opinion. The Prio and the Lono both have those. So we'll just kind of get that out of the way and we'll move on to some other features. So admittedly, design-wise, the Prio may or may not be your cup of tea. It definitely has a very unique look and it's very Xero. It's probably one of their more early adoptions of footwear, and so it has a classic Xero sort of lacing system that's built into that, where they have these little straps that come around the heel and actually attach to the sole of the shoe on the outside and then come up and attach to the laces. I think this is a construction design that was made to sort of maintain some of the shape of the shoe, but I think in more recent iterations has just become more of a design staple rather than anything else. But depending on your styling and what you like to wear shoes with, this may or may not be a deciding factor for you. Personally, I spend a lot of time here at the clinic, and so my traditional Prios have a little bit of an athletic look. I don't necessarily need them to be like a casual shoe for going out on dates, things like that, and I definitely don't wear them for that. Most of the time that I wear the Prios, I'm wearing them either to work or to work out. I've worked out in my traditional Prios. I don't work out as much in the suede ones, but from a design perspective, if you're okay with it looking a little bit different, then this might be a good option for you. But I have had some people tell me that it just doesn't fit their design aesthetic, and that's totally okay. From a toe box perspective, the Prio actually happens to be a little bit more narrow than some of the other shoes that I've reviewed. And in comparison to the Lono, the toe box is actually a little bit narrower than the Lono Flow. So it really depends on the type of foot that you have. Some people have really great alignment from their big toe to their little toe and just have a more straight foot. The Xero might fit really well if you have more of a straight foot. If you happen to have like a fan-shaped foot, where your big toe kind of comes off this direction, but it's really wide at the top and your toe splay is super wide, you might not actually find these to be relatively comfortable because even though they're foot-shaped, they're a little bit more narrow and it might actually cram your feet together. So that's something to consider when it comes to potentially purchasing these. Just take a look at your foot and kind of get a good idea of where that shape is, just so you have an idea of where you might land when you put your foot in one of these. Moving the toe box width aside, toe box height inside of the Prios is actually really good. And what I mean by that is that the shoe isn't so thin through the toe box that it's like cramping down on your toes. It has a pretty decent height in there so that you've got a lot of room to move your toes up and down and left and right, which I really like about the Prios. Heel construction on the Prio versus the Lono is going to be a huge deciding factor if you're considering one versus the other. When you sort of take a top-down look at the Prios, you can tell that they've really padded the outside. That's obviously designed for comfort. I mean, they want you to have some wiggle room. They want it to be soft. They don't want materials cutting into your feet and this, that, or the other. But it can also sort of create this look with the shoe, depending on what you enjoy, that makes it look a little puffy. And so for me, sometimes I get that feeling of like, do my feet look a little bit weird inside of these because of the way that they're shaped? Just understand that if you're wanting a looser feel, you're probably going to get that with the Prio. And I'll talk about this in a second with the Lonos, but it's a lot more of a snug sock-like feel. So it really just kind of comes down to what you prefer from a comfort perspective. The upper material on the Prio, and especially talking about sort of the mesh upper, is definitely breathable, but I wouldn't say it's super breathable. I have worn these with and without socks, and I find that wearing them with socks is a little bit better. If I go no socks for too long, my feet do kind of sweat a little bit beyond what you would expect if something was way breathable. And so I would highly recommend wearing socks if you're going to be wearing the Prios. But the mesh is really soft, it's super comfortable, and sort of the outer shell, which is suede on this pair, but sort of just like a durable plastic that's on the outside of the other ones, can handle pretty much anything you throw at it. What I have mentioned on my traditional Prios in a previous video is that after a little bit of time of wearing them, sort of right along the edge here where your foot starts to bend, mine have started to crack. They're not falling apart by any means, but that sign of wear and tear definitely like builds up as you go. So keep that in mind. And lastly, let's talk about the tread pattern underneath the shoe. The Prios have just your traditional flat sort of tread pattern. Nothing is like sticking out like thick lugs or anything like that. It's definitely not a hiking shoe. So I would say traction wise, you can expect this to just kind of feel like a traditional tennis shoe. They have a really cool design built into this that I think helps a little bit with traction, but when compared to the Lonos, relatively flat if you run your hand across the bottom of the shoe. From just a casual perspective, just wearing every day, not really that big of a deal. But if you're looking for something that maybe you can use in both your casual wear and your fitness, that might be something to consider depending on what you do in your fitness. Overall, I think the Prio is a solid option for your very first barefoot shoe. It fits really well within that budget category, and it has a lot of the main features that you would expect in a barefoot shoe that'll get you kind of used to what that should feel like. Maybe your foot design is perfect for the width of the toe box, but it'll give you an opportunity to start practicing, wearing something that's flat, wide, and flexible if you're not used to that, and it won't break the bank for you to try that out. All right, let's talk about the Lono Flows. If you want to watch a more in-depth first impression review video, I'll just tag that up here because I did that recently and it seems to be really useful for a lot of people. But for the purposes of this comparison, I'm just gonna briefly go over some of the details like I did with the Prio so you have a general idea of what I think about the shoe. Like I mentioned earlier, it fits the criteria for a good barefoot shoe for me. So it's flat, it's wide, and it's very, very flexible. This has a really good mobility factor to it, and it fits in the same way that the Prio does. Design-wise, you're gonna see a relatively similar design choice to the Prio in that the lacing is sort of integrated into the materials on the outside of the shoe to sort of hug it and bring it in closer to the foot. And so what you can kind of tell is that the main laces that go through the top of the shoe will actually wrap around sort of this like suede outer inside of the shoe as well to create some comfort and stability. But really this is more of a design factor than it is a function factor because the Lono is actually a sock-like design for the shoe. You really can wear these without ever having to tighten your laces down because of the way the sock is designed. It hugs your foot and it keeps everything pretty secure. Which leads me into sort of that heel cup design thing that I mentioned earlier from the Prios. The Prios are kind of puffy, maybe a little bit wide, and they don't hug your heel in the same way. The Lonos are quite the opposite. It's a sock-like design that sort of hugs your heel and grabs your foot, and you feel very secure from the back end of these shoes, much so to the point where if I wanted to wear these in a workout, I wouldn't have to worry about lacing them up and making sure that they're tight so I don't like break my ankles doing side-to-side work or anything like that. So these would transition from casual to sport a lot easier, I think, than the Prios would. I mentioned that the Prios have a little bit of a narrower toe box design, although they are foot-shaped. The Lonos have a much wider design compared to the Prios. So that straight line action from the big toe and then fanning out towards the edges is a lot wider than the Prios are. I compared the Flows to Vivo Barefoot, just kind of in the way that those are designed. These are pretty much a much cheaper option compared to the Vivo Barefoots as well. But design-wise, I think if you have a slightly wider foot, it might fit a little bit better inside of these. Price-wise, the Lono Flows are under what the Prios cost. These are actually only $76 now. A little bit of a hang-up on that, though, might be their supply. So recently there have been a lot of orders on these, and when you go and look on their website, they don't have very many available in certain sizes. And so they're in the middle, I think, of trying to restock and produce more of the shoes. But from a pricing perspective, like you're about $10, well, that'd be about, what, $14 less than what the Prios are. So from a budget perspective, these are actually going to cost you less money and potentially have a greater functional value than the Prios do. The mesh on these is a lot more breathable than the Prios, I've found. I have worn these with socks and without socks, and I find that they actually feel a little bit more comfortable completely without socks. And that's totally fine because the mesh opens up so much that I haven't noticed my feet sweating as often. And so these I think would feel a lot more barefoot because you're actually barefoot inside the shoe. One potentially negative that I've noticed, especially if you're somebody who needs to have some cushion inside of their shoe, I've needed to remove the insoles on these, which is totally fine. They're super usable without the insoles. But wearing socks and wearing the insoles really crammed the space inside of these shoes and made my foot feel a little bit stiff. And so removing the insoles is the best first step to kind of create more room in here. The second best step is to wear these totally without socks altogether. What I will mention, because of how snug they are, and I mentioned that toe box height with the Prios, these have a much lower toe box height. The potential for your foot to kind of feel like it's really stiff and you might want to take the shoes off to remove some pressure. I've noticed that does build up over a long period of time of wearing these. So I need to try to have these on for a long period of time just to see what's sort of that endurance factor for my feet inside of these. The Prios I could probably wear all day long and not notice that they're on my feet. The Lonos so far, over a period of time, you start to feel like, okay, I might want to take these off. So consider that when it comes down to your purchase. With that in mind, if you're looking for something that is more of a functional shoe for you, that you could wear to work and then go do a workout in and not really have to change shoes back and forth, I really think that these would be a good option because you can do a lot in these. I've lifted in these, I've ran, I've done some box jumps, I've done lots of stuff in these shoes and they function really well. And part of the reason that they handle that stuff so well is the tread pattern underneath. So when we look at the outsole for the shoe, we get these like three-dimensional lugs that are kind of built into the bottom. And so traction-wise, if you're doing sprints, if you're doing agility work, the secureness of the heel and the traction pattern that's underneath the shoe will probably serve you better in a sport environment than the Prios would. So it really comes down to what's the ultimate use case that you want out of the shoe. Overall, each of these have some big differences, but from a price perspective, they're gonna land you in the zone that you wanna be in. $89 here, $76 here, you're under $100 for your first pair of barefoot shoes. It really just comes down to what are you looking for? Are you looking for something that's gonna be super soft and comfy, that has a nice casual look to it that you could probably wear to work or to the gym if you wanted to? or you're looking for something that maybe has a tad bit more of a functional fitness use, that is a little bit more sporty, that you could wear in any situation that you want, but design-wise, maybe just kind of fits your aesthetic a little bit better than the other. I have positive feelings on both, and I wear each in very different scenarios. So I don't think you can go wrong no matter which one you pick. And if you're curious about what each kind of look like, and maybe if you want to consider buying a pair, I'll just put a link down in the bottom for each of these that you can access and use whatever you want. No pressure on that though at all. If you don't want to support me at all, don't even use my link. Just go to their website, search the shoes, and purchase them that way as well. I will say access to the Prios is going to be a lot faster. You'll get these a lot sooner because they have a massive stock of these. The Lonos seem like they're going to be on a little bit of a back order because of the volume that I think they're getting out of these. So there's limited sizing options on this, but a little bit cheaper on this end with a different sort of function than the Prios. Obviously, Xero Shoes doesn't have just the Prio either. There's other versions of the shoe. I think the Prio Neo is a pair that I haven't tried yet, but it's sort of an upgraded version of the traditional Prio, and I think it's right at $100. And so if you wanted to kind of stay right at that zone, that might be a good option for you to try as well. For the purposes of this video, hopefully it was useful for you to kind of get a glimpse at each of these from a budget perspective, so you understand maybe what you're getting yourself into depending on what type of shoe you want to start with. But give them a shot. If you've tried either of these, let me know in the comments. And also let me know in the comments if there's any other shoes that you've tried that you think might be a little bit better from a budget perspective compared to these. So that's it for the review. Hopefully this was helpful for you. I only want this information to be helpful and not convoluted. So if there's any advice, or feedback, or positive remarks that you want to leave in the comments, just let me know. I check those pretty often and love to engage with you guys in that section. So until next time, give one of these a shot or don't. It doesn't really matter. I'll catch you guys in the next video.